I will start off by saying that the event took place in Mexico, a place called Guanajuato. I had just moved there a few months before having my second son, and a lot of people in Mexico believe that if a child isn't baptized soon, a witch will come and take the child. The first night I slept in that house before having my second son, I had a really vivid dream of a black mist like floating above me and my 1-year-old. I could clearly see how it was just looking at my son. After a few minutes of seeing the black mist, my son woke up crying, but I couldn't move whatsoever. I could just hear him screaming and crying, and I was finally able to wake up, and my son was asleep. He was never woken up or had been crying. A couple months later, I had my second son. We went to bed like normal, with my newborn sleeping in the middle, and in the middle of the night I hear a loud noise and wake up to see my son on the floor, almost under the bed. And please remember, he is a newborn at this time, so no rolling or moving basically. I got up and picked him up and went straight to my mother-in-law's. She lived next door, and I explained what happened, and she told me that a witch was trying to take my son since he was not baptized. After that night, a lot of weird noises would happen near my room, and a black cat would always be outside my window. I later moved out of that house, and my brother-in-law and his wife and newborn moved in, and a lot of things would happen to them as well.
I really don't share this story for several reasons. One is being obviously seen as unhinged or a liar. The other, probably a stronger reason. I'm still afraid that will come after me. I'm really curious, though, about other people's encounters. I've seen a couple similar stories on here. In Mexican folklore, there's a story about a dismembered hairy hand that will tickle misbehaving children who don't go to sleep when they're told to. Essentially, it's a boogeyman, do what your parents say type of monster. There's probably several variations, but this is the one that I grew up with. When I was 3, I was sleeping on the bottom bunk and awoke to something tapping my right hand. There were 2 large drawers where my sister and I kept all of our toys beneath the bed. Whatever was tapping on me was coming from the drawer underneath me. Before I opened my eyes, I just felt this frantic, or enthusiastic, I guess, tapping on my hand. I remember the slapping sound too. My parents would leave the hallway light on to help my sister and I sleep comfortably. So I saw what was waking me up viscerally. I opened my eyes and saw this large hand curved up from beneath the bottom bunk, slapping my own hand. Imagine man hands from Seinfeld. It was green like the color of pea soup. It had black hair on the back of its hand that traveled up its fingers. The fingernails were also green, though short. Maybe it got a mani before visiting me. Its skin was really dry, and I distinctly remember how coarse the skin felt. When I started moving my hand, it almost looked like it was signing to me. It looked like it was saying Y in ASL. I have no idea what that would even translate to in dismembered hand language, but I remember its moving fingers and the hand like it was trying to tell me something. I squealed, shut my eyes, and covered my hand under the pillow. I started screaming frantically for my parents, and I could hear my sister shifting above me. Both my parents ran in, and I'm obviously inconsolable. My dad told me it was just him teasing me, and then my memory of the rest stops right there. The next morning at breakfast, I was eating pancakes with my family. I asked why Dad was playing a prank on me and tapping my hand from under the bed. My parents looked at each other tensely and then quickly changed the subject. I feel like I will never have an answer to what had happened. The rest of my arm was covered by my blanket, so my one theory is that I thought I was another severed hand. Is that even possible? For years as a kid, I thought I saw it a couple more times, and that it would run around the other hands, pure black, pure white, but those might have just been nightmares. I started dreaming then about being tickled and suffocated by a severed hand and feet. It almost sounds comical at this point, but fuck, it was terrifying, man. What's wild to me is that my cousin, who was the same age as me, also experienced a severed green hand chasing her up the basement steps until she shut the door on it. I also have a friend who, without knowing anything about my experience, told me his cousin saw a green dismembered hand, trying to coax her into the bedroom closet late at night. She was around 3 or 4 at the time. Was there just something in the air in the 90s or what?
I'm Brazilian, English is a little bit rusty, but the important thing is that you understand what I'm trying to say. Years ago, I had a little problem with some strange type of epilepsy while trying to sleep that also involved seeing strange entities in my room. And now that I got physically attacked by something, it all makes total sense. It all started years ago when I was trying to sleep one night, but every single time I was close to finally start sleeping, my body suddenly started to tremble involuntarily, and I was unable to move my body to stop it. Fortunately, these epilepsy attacks lasted a maximum of 2 seconds, and every time it happened, I had strange visions, like seeing the head of a snake in front of me or in front of my bed watching me. I also had the feeling of someone literally trying to pull my leg. It is worth mentioning that I had never had a problem like this before, and even after these events, I was always exposed to possible epilepsy triggers and never had attacks. It just started on a random day and suddenly stopped days later. My mother thought I had some spiritual connection, but I hadn't believed her. Although I believe that the electrical discharge in the brain caused by epilepsy attacks can temporarily activate some parts of the brain and have you see things that you can't see with the naked eye. It wasn't possible that I was being attacked by some type of entity. After that horrible week where I couldn't literally sleep, everything finally stopped and I could finally rest. The attacks continued happening, but was really rare, like one time a month, and I had stopped having hallucinations. Last year I moved from the city and continued my life well and happy, but now it is apparently happening again. I started having those little body tremblings again, but now I can literally feel something slowly trying to take off my shirt. I was so naive that I never paid attention to this thing touching me, and every time I had these attacks, I thought it was nothing special. But yesterday, I had an attack and I saw someone standing in front of my bed and observing things or just looking at nothing. These visions are always kind of blurry, so it looked like a blonde, lean man. I didn't care about that and went back to sleep. Now that I'm writing this, it's 3:15 a.m. and I don't want to go back to sleep. Around 2:10 a.m., I put my phone on the charge and tried to sleep. I wasn't even close to sleeping, and I felt the entity again, but this time, it looked really angry. It tried to take off my shirt by force and started hitting me with its hands. I saw it face to face. The vision was blurry and the room was dark, but I could literally see some of its form by the energy it exhaled. It definitely didn't have a human form, and it was so angry I could feel it. It lasted no more than 2 seconds, and when it ended, I turned the lights on and saw the bruises it did on my arms, to the point where my skin is now red. Suddenly, it all makes sense now. It was never epilepsy episodes. It is a sexual entity trying to feed on my energy. I told it to fuck off and turned my cell phone back on to try and tell the story to someone who is still awake, but everyone seems to be sleeping. Does anyone who understands the arts of the esoteric, spiritual, whatever, can help me get rid of it? I really don't want to go back to sleep now because I think it will try to attack me again. I think this entity may be a male, incubus. I'm bisexual, but prefer mostly guys. Fun fact, I was always told that I have mediunic abilities, and considering some things I've discovered about myself recently, the information may be true. Fun fact 2, since my birth until 13 years old, I was constantly haunted by shadow people, but I got so used to these types of things that I don't even fear them anymore. They even stopped appearing after that, so even though an entity tried to assault me, I wasn't scared. It's not like a bodiless creature could easily kill me.
Sorry for the long post. I had experience that I cannot explain in any way. This happened when I was maybe 13 or 14, and I want to believe this was a dream, but I know it happened. I'm from Eastern Slovakia, in a city that isn't necessarily religious, but has a lot of stories about demons and unholy things. We have one specific legend about what we call a zerdalak, a demon that mirrors whoever is looking at it, but I never really believed in that stuff. We live in a small Slavic house, and I shared a room with my brother and 2 sisters. One night I was in bed and having trouble sleeping, just lying there wide awake. After what seemed like a couple of hours, I decided to go to the bathroom. We didn't have a bathroom inside, so you had to go out the front door, around the house to the outhouse. I get up and step over my brother to leave the room and go out the front door. I grab my glasses on the way, so I can see clearly outside. I know I wasn't just mistaking these things for bad vision. As soon as I step outside, I turn to the left to go around the house, and I am face to face with myself, maybe 2 meters in front of me. It is clearly me. Same face, same age, same glasses, wearing different clothes than I was wearing, but still clothes that I had owned. We stared at one another, both wide-eyed in shock, neither of us moving. After maybe 5 seconds, he just turns around casually and walks around the corner of the house. I am frozen and in shock. I know I'm not dreaming. After a minute or two, I slowly walk around the corner and there's no one there, just the outhouse maybe 15 meters away. So I go to it and pee really fast, and then get back inside and get in bed. I lie awake confused and rethinking what had just happened, and eventually I finally fall asleep. I don't know how long it was, but I wake up at some point to someone yelling. I sit up startled, and my brother, who is 8 or 9 years old at the time, comes running back into the room yelling all types of crevasse and peklos. He's freaking out, pacing back and forth in our room. Me and my now awake sister try to calm him down and ask what happened. He looked like he's having a psychotic breakdown. After a few minutes, we get him to calm down and talk to us about what had happened. He said he went outside to use the bathroom, just as I did, and as soon as he got outside of the door, he came face to face with himself. He told the exact same story I did. My sisters tell him he's just tired and seeing things. It was just a bad dream. I never said anything to him. He said he didn't want to go pee anymore, and he got into bed. We all went back to sleep, and I never told him about my experience. Ever. I hadn't thought about this until today. It's been well over a decade. I'm now living in Salt Lake City. I woke up this morning next to my girlfriend who's still asleep. I go about my morning, get up and put my contacts in, brush my teeth, and do the normal things. I decided to go to the gym before my girlfriend woke up, so I get ready and leave the house. I go down the stairs and out into the parking lot. But as soon as I turn to the left to go towards my car, there I am again. But this time, I'm not face to face. The other me is standing maybe 100 meters away behind my car. I start walking towards him, never taking my eyes off him. We are staring at one another. I get to 40 meters away, and I can clearly tell it is myself. What makes me more certain is he is wearing a green jacket that I had in my passenger seat of my car. It is not easy to mistake. At about 20 meters away, he turns and walks behind the car, and I lose sight of him. I get to my car and look in the window. My jacket is no longer on my seat. I am so freaked out by this point, I just go back into my apartment and get back in bed. I'm lying here typing this out now, and I'm in shock. I know I'm not dreaming, because I'm clearly wide awake. I don't know if this circuit lock is real, or if it's just some kind of sick hallucination.
I really don't know where to start, so I'm just going to ramble out what happened. I was on my way to work, just as a normal any other day. Same time, same route, same music, same coffee. Almost made it there too. In all honesty, I don't remember what made me drive off the road and into the ditch totaling my car. I don't remember the crash. I swear to this day, I made it to the next stop sign and got behind a black Dodge Challenger and made the next right turn behind it. It must have been an out-of-body experience because my car and I were in a ditch 20 to 30 feet before that stop sign. Fast forward, I woke up in the hospital, disoriented and confused. I had never been in a hospital bed staring at the ceiling before, so I guess I was asked the routine questions. Do you know where you are? My smartass always has something to say. It's not heaven. I probably wouldn't be going there. A hospital? Do you know why you're here? And for the love of all that's good, I could not remember one single bit of it. I legitimately thought I made it to that stop sign. Didn't even know I had a car accident. No, what happened? Is there anyone you'd like us to contact? I didn't remember that I was married, much less the name of my spouse. But it was at that moment when I looked up and saw at the foot of my bed 3 large shadows. There was one officer at the window to my left, 2 nurses on my right between the bed and the wall, and the doctor was at my hip to my left. I asked why so many people. The doctor said the nurses had to be there and the cop had to do a report. I pointed at the shadows at the foot of my bed, but they were gone now. The doc confirmed, there's nobody there. Still dazed and confused, the officer now standing at my hip and the doctor at the foot of the bed told me I was in a car accident. So I asked if there's anyone else injured. People in the other vehicle, walking pedestrians. God forgive me if I hit an innocent animal. Lord knows we have deer, fox, and bunnies in the area. No, just you. It was just you. I'm a good person with a good heart, so maybe it was the relief that I didn't hurt anyone else. I started to cry. The officer kindly wished me a speedy recovery and made his way out. I wiped my tears, opened my eyes, and like that, the worst jump scare in a 3D movie, there was an old man in my face repeatedly saying, "Help me." I froze up. I felt my heart skip a beat. Hair stood on my arms, legs, and neck. I sensed my blood pressure drop and the heart monitor made its noise. Trying to evaluate the situation as best I could, as quick as I could, I looked around. The nurses who were to my right were gone. I must have missed the moment they left. To my left was the old man in full body apparition. It wasn't just him. There were 4 phantoms asking me for help, 3 male and 1 female. They all had clothing, like the kind you would see in Civil War history book era. The nurses rushed in because the beeping machine attached to me, and I passed out. When I woke up, there was a surgeon telling me the extent of my injuries, which I don't feel are relevant for the writing, so I'll leave them out. I asked him to send up the hospital priest. He tried to press for information as to why I wanted the priest, but I simply told him I wanted someone to pray with. Again, I passed out. The time lapses between passing out and waking up were never clear to me. When I woke up, the priest was there with me. He stood to my right in plain clothes, asked why I wanted him there. I asked him to close the door. After he did, I told him everything I saw, the shadow people, the old man, and the other 3 with him asking for help. I asked the priest to pray for any lost souls, to bless the room I laid in, and to bless me with holy water. He told me he understood my concern and would pray for me and come back to check on me. I spent another 3 weeks laying in that hospital bed, passing out and waking up. After making a full recovery, I've gone back to the hospital to visit the cathedral and thank the priest. I don't know if the prayers by the priest helped. I can only hope they did.
A little of my history. I've experienced many entities in my time. Most come and go within a short period of time, but will speak and not hold a conversation with me. Some have stayed for long periods of time and interacted with me to great extent. Some have been overwhelmingly positive, some overwhelmingly negative, as far as convincing me to injure and at times nearly kill myself. And more often, simply neutral entities that just happen to come into contact with. Some can physically touch me, some can speak out loud, as if another person in the room. Though most are closer to telepathic. Sometimes it's paralyzingly terrifying. Sometimes it's life-changingly positive. Usually, again, just a neutral, interesting experience. When entities come, I welcome them. I stop what I'm doing and give them space to say or do whatever they need to communicate. Anyways, today I encountered a new entity. I hopped in bed and immediately felt something patting and caressing my head. I thought, oh, this is nice. Then she threw something at me. It was hard and hit me straight on the throat. At that moment I said out loud, "I would love to get to know you. You are welcome here, but you need to be nice to me." Everything following that was positive. She was shy, but she did tell me some things about herself. She said her name is Tagal. Later I did some research, and it seems that this Telugu word, it's a language of southern India, meaning touching. Other translations include erosive and infectious. That last one definitely concerned me a bit. She was responsive to me, and demonstrated that she is capable of both telepathy and external speaking. She had a sense of humor. She sang to me beautifully. She is capable of physically touching me, like my head, and obviously throwing that thing at my throat. To be able to speak externally and physically touch me is rare in my experience. Something unusual. Typically when I hear disembodied voices or entities, whether it's external, internal, or telepathic, I find I instantly know everything about them. What they look like, their age, sex, where they're from, their history, etc. None of this is true to Tegel, though. I have no idea what she looks like, how old she is, none of it. I do strongly suspect she is from the Telugu-speaking region of southern India. I believe she used to be a living human, and this is her spirit. And she is here to help me. I should add, I live in the US and have zero connection to Hinduism. I've been going through a significantly difficult and confusing time in my life. I think she, her altruistic self, sensed this in the universe and came to find me. Soon, into our interaction, which lasted approximately 3 to 4 hours, it became very clear to me that she was showing me mindfulness, how to stay in the absolute present moment, and to trust myself and my experiences. She only exists in the absolute present moment. Like I said, I've experienced many entities who have come and gone over a short period of time. But I sincerely hope Tegel is one who sticks around. I welcomed her with open arms and invited her to come anytime. Edit. I've been doing some research on Hindu ghosts. There seems to be identifying features when they are seen. But I have not seen Tegel's form, so I cannot say. But it sounds like they often search for milk. I feel such a strong desire to welcome and encourage Tegel to return and continue communicating with me. Such a thing cannot be forced though, and I want to show her I am welcoming her. I think I'll purchase some milk and leave it out for her. Good idea, yes or no?
Okay, so I'm not good at telling stories, but someone suggested I post this on here, so here we go. Let me start off by saying, my family and I have always thought of this to have been a super strange phenomenon, but to this day have not been able to understand what the heck happened. When we were younger, our cousin Daniela always talked to us about how these 2 dolls she had were possessed and plotting to kill her. Well, one of the dolls belonged to her and the other was a porcelain Tinkerbell doll that belonged to her older sister. They shared rooms, by the way. We never paid mind to it because she had a wild imagination. Fast forward into months, maybe even a year into her telling us these stories, one weekend my older sister and I stayed over at her house. It was 4 of us upstairs playing in the room, and we knew to stay on Daniela's side of the room and away from her older sister's side. It was a small room though, and we were children though, so we didn't listen. Somewhere in the middle of being all over the place, we knock down the Tinkerbell doll, and it completely shatters. Immediately, we all freak out because we were told by our aunt to stay away from that side of the room, and we completely disobeyed her. Not to mention my aunt was terrifying, so we knew we were in for an ass beating, lol. We tried thinking of ways to fix it, but there was no way. It was completely shattered, so we start crying, realizing we were screwed. Go downstairs and in tears apologize to our aunt for disobeying her and breaking the doll. She starts yelling at us, then decides to go upstairs and clean up our mess. Here's where things get weird. Once she gets upstairs, she starts screaming at us again, but this time she's calling us liars. We run upstairs and come to find that the doll isn't shattered. It's completely intact and back to where it was before. We immediately look at each other with our jaws open. It was then my cousin Daniela went from being scared with us to almost being relieved and starts saying, "I told you guys I wasn't crazy. The doll is possessed. I told you. I told you." The rest of us ran out of the room and called our parents to come get us. After that day, we refused to go back to that house.
Hey y'all. Just 3 days ago, me and my friend went up to Walmart. There's this pavement trail up by my neighborhood basketball court. And all of a sudden, 3 people almost practically materialized in front of us. Thought nothing of it at first, as the trail is commonly taken. However, upon closer inspection, the people looked like 3 of our friends, down to the exact point. Normally, I would have no problem with this. However, one of our friends had gone to Georgia, and the others were at their house. Around this point, we got creeped out, but oh well, might as well keep going, right? We get about halfway up the trail, and one of our friends' voices calls out. The voice being exact in cadence, tone, and you name it. This is where things got weirder. Me and my friend both turned around to each other and asked if that was really our friend. From there, we braced ourselves for a silly jump scare, and turned the corner of the trail, and they were gone. We kept going and saw them again, this time in a home goods parking lot on the way there. We were able to get a good look at them as we were far enough away not to be detected, but close enough to get the details. I saw one of them, our younger friend of the group, was just standing at an angle. I checked his face for identifiable features, but there was no face? I mean, like there was no features whatsoever on his face. It mortified me. The others turned around a little bit, at the same angles they were, preparing to get to the next part of the trail that directly led to Walmart. All their faces were all contorted. I mean, physically impossible kind of contorted. And I realized they were following a particular pathway we followed about a month ago. Down to the exact foot placement, people placement, and everything. They rounded the corner and we followed not far behind. They were gone. Entirely gone. I mean, no trace, nothing. Like they didn't even exist. I brought this up with one of my friends we supposedly encountered, and she freaked out. She was more freaked by the fact that them taking that trail meant that they were nearby anything else. It's sort of become a taboo topic, but I think they followed me home. Just today, I was taking out the garbage, and down through this alleyway there is a voice speaking to me. It was the same as my friend's voice, just ever so noticeably yet slightly distorted. I turned and there was 3 figures, shrouded in shadow. Their outlines were the same as those very same quote-unquote friends I had encountered. Needless to say, I finished taking out the trash at lightning speed. I don't really see any of this as extreme right now. I'm more just looking for closure on what had happened. And I really don't need anything immediately. If anyone has any answers, and I know someone does, please let me know. Thank you so much.
This is my first ever Reddit post, because I would love some thoughts on this. Last night I woke in the middle of the night and had my worst fear actualized. There was something standing at the foot of my bed, staring at me. I will say right off the bat that this was not an episode of sleep paralysis. I have never had sleep paralysis before and could move the entire time. In fact, I immediately sat up when I saw it. It was completely 3D and solid like a physical form. The light from my LED nightlight reflected off its skin. It was very tall. It wore a headdress of big black feathers that fanned out like a Mayan headdress and reaching my ceiling. Its skin was very dark, almost black. Its eyes were barely visible, but the sockets were surrounded in half circles of white paint. It had white paint smeared near its mouth. It wore only a long tan leather hide draped over its shoulders. Around its neck hung a tangle of dangling objects. Wood? Stone? I don't know what they were. Its chest was exposed, and it had more white paint and messy smears across its chest, almost as if to mimic a rib cage. It stood there, stiff and tall, and it just scared me. It had a menacing feeling, but made no movements to show malice. Perhaps it was simply its primal appearance that made it feel so. Something about it felt ritualistic, but I really can't say why. It stood there for maybe 5 seconds, then it sort of rippled and was gone. It made me so afraid. It was primal and fierce, almost human, yet it definitely was not. In a way, it sort of reminded me of a Kachina doll, although the dolls looked much friendlier. I looked it up and saw ogre Kachinas that had very similar features. Tall feather headdresses, white circles around the eyes, paint on their chests. It may or may not be worth mentioning that a few days before this, I went to Mesilla, New Mexico. Perhaps I linked with something there, or perhaps not. I should also mention that I'm going through some very deep grief, so may be more open and vulnerable to things. I've never had an experience like this before. Does anyone have any thoughts on what this could have been? Giant Demonic Spider by Actually Dead. These happened about 5 years ago when I was living a very destructive lifestyle. I woke up having a view of myself in third person and first person at the same time. I was laying down, paralyzed and levitating about 4 feet off my bed, with my blanket still dropped over me. I noticed a massive tarantula-like spider that was big enough to cover my entire chest sitting on top of me. I was absolutely petrified. I remember the entity trying to give me a very strong, menacing sense of superiority. like it was stronger than me and that it was in control of the situation. After 10 seconds of this, it began speaking to me telepathically. In a very deep voice, it said, "My name is," then saying an extremely bizarre sounding name from a language I've never heard of before, and I don't think I could spell it if I tried. It felt like whatever it was trying to possess me, because like I said, it gave a very strong feeling that it was superior than me and in charge of my life now. It was introducing itself. That was the last thing I remembered before waking up. I had another experience with the spider where I'd just woken up and wasn't paralyzed this time. The entity was on my roof at the other side of the room. This time, it didn't look like a solid being. It looked like it was made out of pure energy. When it noticed that I could see, it started scurrying towards me very aggressively. And before it got to me, it disappeared. That all happened within like 10 seconds. This one happened around the same time. I had woken up on my bed. I had the same POVs and I was paralyzed again, but this time I wasn't levitating. I suddenly felt an invisible force grab onto my left leg. It very slowly started dragging me off the bed, and I was being dragged. My body was violently flopping around like a rag doll. I had no control over this. I realized what was happening and I tried to call for Jesus, but as I was saying "Gee," something held my lips. I literally couldn't say his name, and I got the feeling that I was unworthy to speak it because of the way I was living. I remember feeling an immense feeling of dread and hopelessness. He wouldn't help me. This one felt like it was a warning to change my ways before it was too late. It was the last thing I remember before waking up. I know you guys will say sleep paralysis, but I feel entities can attack us in our dream state and cause what's known as sleep paralysis. There's more stories where people called on Jesus and it ended the sleep paralysis episode. Am I saying all sleep paralysis episodes are demonic? I don't know, but mine certainly felt like it. I seen that spider thing another time while I wasn't in sleep paralysis, as I explained in my second section. So that's another reason that pushed me to believe it was really demonic. I also stupidly experimented with astral projection and had the same third and first person views, astral projecting, as I did during my episodes. I've been targeted by other entities while I was intentionally astral projecting, but that's another story. A Haunting in Rural Utah by The Past Magician. This is my first Reddit post, so I may as well start with a bang. Back in 2011, I was living in a rural town called Monroe, Utah, finishing up my senior year in high school. Monroe is a town of around 2,000 residents and is home to one of the largest mountains in Utah, which my grandparents' house, where I was living at the time, resided at the base of. Our house was on top of a foothill and overlooked the quaint Monroe Valley. The house itself was about 3,500 square feet, with an entryway foyer that was approximately 25 feet high and had a front room on either side of the entryway, and then the main living room and kitchen towards the back of the house facing the mountain. The upstairs had 3 bedrooms, a small library, and then a balcony overlooking the foyer. The basement was a house itself, complete with 3 bedrooms, a living room, and a kitchen. Hopefully this paints y'all a picture of the setting. At this point in my life, my grandpa had recently been diagnosed with cancer. Because we didn't have a hospital in the area with an adequate treatment center, my grandparents temporarily moved to southern Utah, where there was a hospital, and left me with a house to finish off my high school graduation and part of the summer, May through July. Because of this, my house was notorious for having boys over, where we would have parties, and then play massive games of hide and seek in the dark. Sounds childish, but man, it was fun. I was also keen on having my friends over at all times, because being alone in a large home is creepy sometimes. And also, because I had several encounters with spirits at one point in my life when I was living with my mom. But that is a story for another time. Anyway, I didn't want to be alone in the house and preferred having people over. Well, right around the middle of June, I had two of my best friends over. Let's call them Jake and Sam. Each of us had a girl over and had picked a room to hang out with them. If you're a religious person, then you probably believe that certain activities aren't necessarily inviting of the Holy Ghost. And then let's just say, my two friends and their girls at my place were doing what I would be considered uninviting the Holy Spirit. LOL. I was with my best friend's sister and had recently been baptized, so I wasn't trying to get down with this girl at this point. Well, I hear a door shut, and my third friend, let's call him Jaden, shows up after having gotten down with his girl at her place. Now I say this because if you're heavily religious, then you believe that the Holy Spirit was probably not in the house at all on this particular evening. But if you aren't religious, then disregard this paragraph. We end up sending the girls home, and it's just us boys enjoying our senior summer playing COD zombies, which I wasn't really into, but I enjoyed watching my friends play. Well, 2:30 a.m. starts to roll around, and my friend Jake asks if we want to play hide and seek in the dark. 1. We play the game while the COD Zombies theme song plays throughout the house, and 2. No hiding in the basement because it's pitch black. Looking back to this night, the moon was fairly bright, so your eyes would adjust quickly to the nighttime if you were hiding and seeking upstairs, but not at all downstairs. Jake, Sam, and I were into scary shit, but Jaden wasn't the biggest fan of it. Regardless, we all decided to play the game to this creepy music, and Jake was the first one as seeker. Sam, Jaden, and I immediately agreed to be bastards and hide in the basement because we knew it'd take Jake forever to find us. So we hide in one of the bedrooms that was filled with a bunch of wooden chairs. About 10 minutes into him searching, we hear him come downstairs and he begins to talk to someone or someone's on the basement stairs. We then hear him yell something to these people, and then he enters the room we're hiding in. He starts moving loads of these chairs to find us, and we start giggling like girls because we knew we broke the rules. We ask him who he was talking to, and he says, "Dude, I thought I was talking to Sam and Jaden, but all of you guys were here, so I have no clue who the silhouettes were on the stairs, that were just looking at me and then ran away." Jake loves scary shit, so we shrugged it off like it was typical Jake trying to make the situation scary or creepy at night. Anyway, 15 to 20 minutes is a long time for one round of hide and seek, so we decide to just chill in the living room on the main floor, while the COD zombie music is playing. After a few minutes of us hanging out, I say, we should watch a real exorcism video. I bet I can find one online. So I bust out my Mac and start searching for a video on obscure websites, and finally find a vid. Jake was all for this, but Jaden and Sam were hesitant, understandably so. But I'm me, and I don't give a fuck, so I turn it on. Interestingly enough, this was shortly after 3 a.m. and was during the witching hour, which I didn't think about until after the fact. So Jake and I are watching this priest just douse this random woman in holy water while the priest is chanting Hebrew at her. The girl is strapped to a table and her body is convulsing, like the chick from The Ring. I remember watching this video and getting cold chills immediately, but I was mesmerized because I'd never seen anything so raw and real of this nature. I couldn't look away. Sam and Jaden tell me to turn it off, and even Jake looks hesitant. This is when things go south real quick. About 20 seconds into the video, I start hearing a knocking noise. Damn, I'm getting cold chills simply typing this. This knocking noise was coming from the master bedroom directly above us in the living room, and it continually gets louder and louder and louder, and suddenly it sounds like 4 or 5 people are running and slamming violently into the walls in the room above us. I look at Jake's face because he was sitting next to me, and I can barely make out a look of horror on his face because, again, the lights were turned off everywhere in the house. Then I hear the chandelier in the foyer quake, and at this point, I'm on high alert thinking, oh shit. Despite Jake fooling around this night, he was a relative goody-goody, and I had never heard him say the F word, but he immediately screams, "Turn it the fuck off." I slam my laptop shut and all 4 of us run directly to the back doors, which was 10 feet away from us. As we're running, we hear a loud thud, 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 as if someone is punching the basement, crawling from underneath us. It sounded like someone or something was trying to just tear through the floor beneath our feet. We made it outside during this time and everything in the house goes silent. No more running from upstairs, no more chandeliers swinging, and no more punching ceiling noises from the basement. It's just us in the middle of the open night sky, torn between trying to look away from the house and towards the mountains, but simultaneously checking to see if someone was going to run out of the house. The house was dead quiet, as if nothing ever happened, and we're all gazing into the house from the backyard. We were probably out in the backyard for 2 minutes in complete silence. I had noticed that Jaden was messaging with someone frantically. We were outside and he looks at me and says, "Michelle told me she was in the house with her drill team friends like 10 minutes ago, but she told me she was only joking. So what in the hell made those noises?" Backstory: everyone in the small town knew my grandparents were away, so it was common for my friends to just pop in the house whenever. Especially the drill team gals, as they were some of our close friends. Right after he says this, I looked at the other guys and all three of them were shedding tears. All three of them were shook to their core about what had happened. During that 45-second window of pure chaos, we each felt a sense of dread and hopelessness sweep over us. It was 1000% a bad spirit, or a few, that had just been in that house. Well, I have this house for another 6 weeks, and at some point I'm going to have to go back in there and sleep in there, so we have to go back in and see what happened. Understandably, they were strongly against the idea, but I felt spiritually strong because of my recent baptism. So I led the way while we single-filedly walked in the house, while each of their hands were gripping the person's shirt in front of them. "We should go to the basement first because it's the scariest and most obvious place where the banging noises were coming from," I say. We slowly creep down the basement steps and I flip on the lights and see that the living room and kitchen were destroyed. The ceiling fans were laying on the ground and, at an initial glance, it had looked like it was ripped straight off the ceiling. There were broken shards of glass and wood chips from the chaos scattered around the room. Now I'm thinking, how in the hell am I going to explain this to my family? Then we decide to search the rest of the house. The only other inexplicable thing was that the master bedroom's closet light was turned on, and we didn't ever turn on. The same night, I decided to go to bed in my room while the guys slept downstairs, because I was on a spiritual high and felt safe. But my friends each felt like they had uninvited the spirit from their sexual endeavors earlier that night, so they all slept in the living room downstairs. Jake woke up the next morning and had a nightmare about a little girl standing in the living room watching them sleep. But Jake loves scary things, so we never really knew if he was being truthful about that dream or not. He's an extremely honest person, but he loves overhyping these types of things. So I never knew what to make of this dream of his. Fast forward to that weekend. My grandparents came over after my grandpa's radiation treatment because I told them what had happened. They're somewhat religious, but not church fanatics, so they weren't sure what to believe at first, but they knew I wasn't a liar, so they took my story as truth. I walked downstairs to the basement with my grandparents, and my grandpa bent a knee to look at the ceiling fan's wiring, and he said, "This was cut perfectly across. Someone did this intentionally. This didn't fall out of the ceiling." Since that day, it only furthered my testimony of a God and an evil. As of 2016, I've started to have weekly reoccurring variations of a dream where I was in that house with a dark presence. I honestly might go to therapy after talking to my wife about it, as it seems to have caused lingering PTSD in some type of form for me. I'll be grateful for that night, because it caused for one hell of a story and an everlasting best friendship with those three guys. Do you think the silhouettes on the stairs from earlier that night were the same spirits that messed with us? Or do you think that they were simply just shadows? Would you all like to hear my other spooky stories? The Demon Claw I've Seen. Legitimate Cajun 96. Okay, so I've been lurking this community for a while. I love reading all of your stories. I've commented some, but I've never read a story like the one I'm going to tell you. I had hoped that I would, so I wouldn't be the only one, and could get some perspective insights on what y'all think. When I was growing up, My family lived in this huge, beautiful Southern-style home. I loved it. I had very good memories there. However, it was the most active home of all that I've lived in since. Very active, but only to my mother and I. My two brothers and my dad never had any experiences. My mother had a couple. I was the only girl, and about 3 when we moved in, and I had a lot. At first, being so young, I didn't think anything of the experiences. I didn't know any better. Later, I'd find out they were not what other people see or interact with normally. I will just tell you all the one that most stands out. One night, I woke up and rolled over. I was barely awake and it was dark in the room. I didn't have a nightlight. There was some black thing lingering at the foot of my bed. I couldn't make it out right then. I sat up in my bed and tried to make it out. I still couldn't really. So I got on my knees and leaned toward it. Now remember, the whole room is dark, but I can clearly see it's something there. It's not a figure. It's just suspended in darkness. As I leaned towards it, within 2 feet, it looks like a hand, but not a hand because it only had 3 fingers, bent slightly as if it were just hanging there. It had no fingernails but pointy tips. It wasn't connected to any body either. I just leaned back against my head frame and watched it until I fell back asleep. It never moved. This happened a couple more times, but it seemed to be closer to me each time. Then one night my cousin stayed over and she slept with me. I woke up and rolled to face her, and it was right there, in my face, hanging directly over her as she slept. It had never been that close before. I was scared. I could actually reach out and touch it, and I wanted to. I reached my arm out and then it pulled back. I never did touch it. I just watched it until I went to sleep again. That was the last time I saw it. Fast forward 10 years. I was helping my mom in the kitchen with supper. As we were talking, that old house came up. I finally told her what I saw and she immediately stopped what she was doing. She asked me more. Then she took 2 pieces of paper out and asked me to draw it. While she was doing something on the other piece of paper. When I finished and she finished, she asked me to swap the papers and we did. She had drawn the same thing. We both just looked at each other in amazement. She told me when she was little, she went to a slumber party. All the girls slept on the living room floor in the sleeping bags. She said she woke up in the middle of the night and saw this claw thing hanging over the girl next to her. She reached out to touch it, and before she did, the girl screamed loudly. Everyone woke up and the girl was crying and saying someone had pinched her. My mom was accused of doing this. She swore she never would have done such a thing, but this girl had been clearly pinched hard enough to draw blood. I've did some research and haven't come up with anything this claw could be. What do you all think? My Scariest Paranormal Experience by Legitimate Dog 4864. I was visiting my grandmother's house up in cold northern Norway. I've always had weird feelings while staying there. Always felt like I was being watched at all times. A constant feeling of unease, especially on the 2nd floor where me and my little sister were staying. Upstairs is 2 rooms. I slept in the room closest to the staircase, and my sister had the adjacent room. The house is fairly old and is rather noisy. Often, getting woken up at night by my sister, walking past my room to go to the bathroom, which is downstairs. My grandmother had struggled for a long time with her sleep. She always wakes up at 3 a.m. every night. She has claimed that there is activity around the house. The classic door opening and closing, sounds of footsteps, and that feeling you are not alone. It was around 2 or 3 a.m., and I could not fall asleep. Was basically rolling around in my bed, and ended up laying in bed staring at the wall. The room started feeling much colder than usual, and something that happened next still gives me chills to this day. I heard loud, raspy breathing right behind me, like someone was laying in bed behind me, breathing heavily. I'll try to describe what it sounded like. It sounded like someone who was very sick, struggling to breathe. I felt air brush over the back of my neck and I completely froze. I was terrified. The breathing lasted for several seconds, but it felt like forever. I started to count to 5 before I would turn over to see if anything was behind me, and nothing. The room was left in an eerie silence. My heart was pounding so fast and hard it felt like it was going to jump out of my throat. And I was staring at the door, almost like expecting it to open. And it did, while staring at the door. I see the door handle go down slowly, and the door creaking open. It's hard for me to explain what I felt at that moment, but it was overwhelming. I managed to leap out of the bed and move into the hallway to try and find any explanation of what happened. But I saw nothing, heard nothing. The windows were all closed, so I couldn't find any explanation of what happened. It felt like I sat in that bed for days, but it was only for a few hours. When the morning finally arrived, I went downstairs and sat myself down in the living room. My sister and grandmother were in the kitchen, and I overheard my sister telling my grandmother something, that around 2 or 3 a.m., she was woken up by a loud, raspy breathing in her room. When I overheard that, it gave me chills to the bones and made me feel even more terrified. Me and my sister used to visit my grandmother every year, but it's been a fairly long time since I managed to get myself to visit my grandmother again. This event happened when I was 16 years old, and I'm now 24. Can't make myself go back there just yet, but planning to go there next year. My grandmother is having a hard time lately, so hopefully I can visit her before it's too late. Maybe I'll get new experiences to write about when I go back there. Thanks for reading about my experience. It's something I will never forget, and I felt like sharing it with everyone in here. Hope my English wasn't too bad since it's not my first language. Weird Night in Canggu, Bali. Written by Upstairs OK. Okay, this will be my first post, but maybe I'll do more since I've had a couple weird experiences throughout my life. I'm Dutch, so apologies for any mistakes in my writing or sentences. So roughly 10 years ago, I went on a 3-week holiday with my girlfriend. We booked a beautiful private villa in a town called Canggu. It had a double bedroom, a big lounge, and a swimming pool with a view over the rice paddies. To get to the entrance of the villa, we had to walk through the alley, and on the left was a big fenced-off house. I always take notice to my surroundings when I'm in a new area, and it looked to me that this place was occupied by locals. Their cars were behind the fence, and I saw a dog walking around on the property. On the second night, that dog started barking off and on. My family owns dogs since I was little, so I know it's normal for a dog to bark out of fear occasionally, so I let it be. But I was checking out the place with a bit more attention. I'm curious by nature, and now inclined to start asking around if anybody knew something about that situation. The Balinese boy who came to manage the pool didn't speak English too well, so I was asking the cleaning lady. She was very nice, and she told me that the residents were still living there, but were out of town for some reason. I also asked if she knew if the dog was getting any attention from the owners, and she replied that the residents came in every day around noon to manage things. So now it's the 4th night in, and the dog is still barking at night. It starts as soon as it gets dark, and I'm beginning to worry about the 4-legged furball. I tried to calm it down a couple times by calling it to the fence, but it was just too frightened to come near. So next day, I'm out on post at noon, and indeed I see someone at the house. I walk up and said hi, but no speaking English, so I started making barking sounds and pointing to their fence. Didn't make sense to the guy. I guess he was in a hurry. All of a sudden, he walked out with a forced smile. Then the 5th morning, I'm looking in the bathroom mirror, and I got bags under my eyes. So does my girlfriend, but she's more capable of zoning out the noise of the dog and falling asleep anyway. I'm calling the owner of our villa now, and since they are Dutchies too, it makes it pretty easy to explain what's happening. They told me they were out of town and wouldn't be back until after the weekend. I told them about the neighbor dog barking me out of sleep for 4 days straight, and they comforted me saying that they will compensate us for it. Just visit us after the weekend and we'll sort things out. 5th night. We fell asleep, but around midnight it woke me up again. Dog was in terror, and I decided to check it out again. This was not normal, and I was getting more frustrated and agitated, thinking, how can I shut the dog's trap? I know it's not the dog's fault, but I needed a quick solution to shut it up and get some sleep after 4 nights. So in the dead of night, I got a bucket and filled it with water, sneaked up stealth mode, and threw it over the fence. I couldn't see the dog, but I knew it was a hit because it gave me a single surprised bark, and then it stopped. I stayed there for a little bit to see if anything weird was going on, and I just got this weird vibe around me. One I recognized and gave me goosebumps. I rushed back to bed and fell in a deep, deep sleep. Now it starts to get weird. In my dream that same night, I'm aware I'm dreaming and something is attacking me. I get pinned down. I'm not able to move anymore. I know I'm dreaming and I force myself to wake up, but I can't. While I'm fighting this thing off of me in my dream, I wake up and realize I'm still fighting it. It takes me quite some force to realize the weight of me, and I'm making sounds as if I'm weightlifting far above my strength. I literally feel my stomach being pushed down to the max, and I'm in survival mode struggling to push it off as it slowly floats away. The transition from a dream to wake state was so weird. I'm screaming at it in my dream, putting up a fight. I wake up and I'm roaring, still fighting, while an intense force is crushing my stomach and chest. When finally I come to my senses, I'm sitting straight up in bed next to my girl who slept through it all. I had to meditate a bit and fell asleep again and told my girl the story when we woke up. Weird thing is, after that night, the dog stopped barking and everything turned normal. After the weekend, I got in touch with the owners and they told me the neighbors got into a family fight. The cleaning lady was familiar with the neighbors and she told me eventually that voodoo was used in the family affair. It turned so bad for the neighbors that they had to flee their house and were living in with family. They left the dog to protect the property, poor dog, and only were brave enough to visit the place during the day. The owner we rented the place from gave us our first week for free. My Encounter with the Cursed Object by EggManTheGod. Hello. When it comes to Reddit, I'm usually just a watcher, never posting much but checking in pretty often. However, I've been encouraged to share my story by many friends who I've told it to in person. My encounter, 3 years ago, is still one I have trouble thinking or looking back on. Anyway, a little background on me and my roommate and the story. We were both practicing Christians, so I do believe in the spiritual side, demons and such. But I had never had any encounters I deemed supernatural per se. That all changed for me 3 years ago. We were living in a small apartment at the time where me and my roommate, let's call him Joe for now, lived at the time. His girlfriend had just gotten back from a mission trip to Haiti and brought home a gift for me. This gift was a crudely wooden carved elephant that she was gifted from a Haitian child. This thing was freaking creepy. It just gave off an eerie vibe by looking at it. Clearly hand carved, with not the best craftsmanship, it was unsettling to look at. However, Joe, being a good boyfriend, graciously accepted the gift. I somewhat jokingly, but also seriously expressed how I did not like the mojo surrounding this thing. He basically explained he thought it was weird, but it was a gift so he was going to keep it. And at that, keep it in our room. Later that night, I received an unusual text from my neighbor who lived across the hall. We were friends but never really texted, so this just struck me as odd when she asked, "Are you okay?" I was in the living room watching a movie at the time, so I replied, "Yeah, just relaxing, watching TV." Met with a response, "Oh, just pulled in and thought I saw you in your room pacing back and forth." My heart dropped. I was home alone at the time. And I immediately ran into my room to find nothing but stillness. I made a glance at the wood-carved monstrosity, which also felt as if it was staring back, then closed the door. Now unsettled, but not completely startled. A couple hours later, it was time for bed. By this time, my roommate had already returned. I told him about the text, but he mainly brushed it off. I've never been a great sleeper, so this experience didn't help get me into a state of rest. However, eventually my mind drifted asleep. This sleep did not last long. A feeling that I'd never felt before came over me. My eyes felt as if they were glued open, and I didn't even notice myself blinking. My body was strapped to the bed, not being able to move any appendage. All I had control over was my eyes. I immediately looked at my roommate across the room, who was dead asleep, with all my might trying to let out anything from my mouth, but not even a whimper. My eyes then looked at the foot of my bed to see a sight that gripped me with a curling fear. An imposing outline of nothing but black. So black, it stood out among the rest of the darkness. There was not a face, no true shape, just a vague structure of a humanoid creature that looked as if it was a void absorbing darkness and growing even blacker by the second. I moved my eyes up to try and avoid the thing, but it was so tall it was hard not to see it. Then it felt as if my chest was crushing. Looking down to the pressure on my chest, it now appeared the thing was coming over me. It wasn't crawling over my bed, more as if it was just levitating, closer and closer, and closer and closer, until I was forced to stare at nothing but the void before me, what I presumed to be this creature's face. There was no emotion, no noise, no nothing, just darkness. And when I think back to this, that's what churns my stomach. The lack of anything is something I had never experienced. I don't remember the thing leaving or me falling asleep. I just woke up in the morning. Naturally, thinking my mind had just dreamt up a terrible nightmare, I was still shaken. However, when I looked to the floor of the room and saw that the wood-carved creature had fallen off its shelf and rolled a solid 3 feet to the foot of my bed, I felt ill from the fear. I immediately decided the events were connected. I have never suffered from sleep paralysis before, or after this event. We got rid of the wooden elephant, then blessed each room of the house and had no issues until we moved out. I truly believe this wood-carved object had something attached to it. I'm not very informed on this subject, but it was of Haitian descent, so my first thought was voodoo. This is my only ever encounter of this type, so please let me know if you'll have any more information or similar stories. Thanks for listening to my story. Sorry if my writing was sloppy. I've never made a post close to this long before. My Childhood Protector, Svenet, by DykeJoon. Repost. Since I talked to my family about Svenet, and they corrected some details and gave me new info. My childhood home was a suburban brick, built in the early 90s, was the model home for the neighborhood. Cheerful yellow planks with deep red shutters. Finished, fully lit basement. Inaccessible attic, open and bright and airy. Unassuming, idyllic, and perfect to raise your children in. I adored my house. I never felt anything but safe there. I was never given any reason to be afraid of any part of it. My family is particularly spiritually sensitive, I'd say. We've all had our own paranormal experiences and a servable sixth sense. Nothing crazy, no hauntings or curses or mysterious deaths. We're just a bit more tapped into that sort of stuff than others. We've got our stories, our secrets, just like everybody else. In the past, I've heard a lot of warnings online about tall shadow people in hats. They're an omen, demonic, dangerous, bad news. If I saw one, I should worry. My tall man wasn't like that. I'm not sure what Svenet was hanging around for, but I'm almost certain that he wasn't out to hurt me, or warn me of something, or even scare me. His presence in my home wasn't even alarming to me. When I caught sight of him, I'd greet him verbally by name, and go about my business. He wasn't a hallucination or a trick of the light. I'm almost sure. He appeared in my peripheral vision, and I often turned to face him. Blink or turn away and turn back, he'd still be there. He came and went as he pleased. He had no set schedule. He showed when he showed, day or night, rain or shine. He always stood in my doorway, as tall as the door was, one hand on the frame as he ducked into my room, frozen mid-step. The outline of his fedora was always visible. "Milady?" He had no discernible features. He was a shadow, black and bottomless. I mostly saw him head on, although a couple times he had already been in my doorway when I tried to come in, and I'd be able to scoot past him into my room simply by walking under his arm. He was super gangly. He was nameless for a couple years, but one day I woke up and knew with certainty that his name was Svenet, like he had whispered into my ear while I was sleeping. He always got kind of pissy when I tried to explore. I would shine a flashlight at him to see if the light would reveal something or reflect back, and he'd disappear in the space between blinks. Same if I noticed him and walked around trying to see him from a different angle, tried to touch him, or got particularly close at all. He didn't seem to mind the ducking under his arm to get into my room bit though. Like he understood it was a necessity and he didn't want to be a nuisance. I spoke to my little sister about it and she says she saw him too, but far less than I did. My room was his favorite haunt, apparently. My oldest cousin says that when she visited and slept in my room, she often woke to him standing at the foot of the bed we were sharing, just watching. Instead of crippling fear, she felt peace and would fall back asleep quickly. I have horrible night terrors and issues with disturbing dreams, but on the days I spotted Svenet, I usually slept soundly and had fairly pleasant dreams, which are a rarity for me. Coincidence? Maybe. But we coexisted very well. He kept me safe and was definitely looking out for me, for his own reasons. We moved out of my childhood home about a year ago now. I haven't seen Svenet since. I think he was tied to that house somehow, although I have no idea how. There's no history behind it to explore. The neighborhood was built on Kickapoo and Miami land, but that's about it. My mama says he was drawn to me, not the house. But if that were the case, wouldn't he have followed me when we moved? Anyone else have an experience like this? I want to compare notes. Encounter with a Shadow Stranger by MissMadificent. I only very recently recalled this memory. This is the only time in my life that I experienced something like this. I've never ever hallucinated before either. Perhaps it can be explained, but I haven't been able to figure out how. Maybe you will. I live in Hawaii on the island of Kauai, and am a 28-year-old female. Approximately 20 years ago, I was on the island of Oahu visiting family on my father's side. I stayed at my auntie's house with her rather large Samoan boyfriend. She was about 5 foot and on the chunky side. She has a daughter, my cousin, who was the same age as me and standing at an average 8-year-old girl's height. You'll see why this information matters. They lived in this neighborhood called Wilhelmina Rise on the bottom floor of a 2-story house. It was set up almost like a fairly spacious studio, where the only room was the bathroom. Otherwise, you could see everything in the studio in its entirety no matter where you were standing. There were 2 queen-size beds several feet from each other, one closest to the TV and the other closest to the back wall. I was sleeping in the bed furthest from the TV, on the inside, having the wall closest to me, and my cousin was sleeping next to me on the outside. My auntie and her boyfriend, of course, were sleeping in the other bed. I want to say it was somewhere between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. when I suddenly woke up. I don't know if I had to use the bathroom or if something disrupted my sleep, but I could see the kitchen when I opened my eyes. I propped myself up onto my elbow to see over my peacefully slumbering cousin. I was puzzled at first as something caught my eye. I thought, I'm just imagining things, as I began to rub my eyes and hoping to be rid of whatever was causing the potential illusion. I look up for my hands, knowing it'd be gone because the explanation was that my eyes were likely just blurry, causing me to see imaginary things, right? That's what everyone else would expect when something like this happens to someone, isn't it? But that isn't what happened. Not in this universe. After rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I look up again, and it's in the same spot as it had been. The next step is to pinch yourself, right? That's exactly what I did. Pinch, pinch, pinch on my forearm as hard as I could to where I had to rub the pain away. Definitely awake. That is definitely standing there. My 8-year-old mind was trying to make sense of what was playing out, but it couldn't. I can't explain the confusion I felt, knowing things weren't adding up when they should be. This doesn't actually happen, except it was happening and there was no explanation. Towering in the kitchen was what looked like to be a male on the slimmer side. If you took notice to the description of everyone staying in the apartment earlier, you'll understand why it was such a brain twister for me. Who is that? I asked myself silently. It stood with his back towards me at the kitchen sink. I stared at it, trying to make out any sort of detail that should have been illuminated by the dim stove light that was left on. The longer I looked at it, the less sense it made. I began to realize, aside from it being in my kitchen, something was off about it. Why couldn't I see any details? Why can't I even see the clothing it's wearing, or the color of its skin? It was as if it were encompassed by a dark, deep, shadowy black. It was a silhouette. What does that even mean? My 8-year-old mind had no idea. I didn't know that shadow people were a thing back then. I wasn't even thinking about ghosts and paranormal things at the time. I was clueless and didn't know what I was dealing with until very recently. The weirdest thing is that when I first looked at it, within that second, my half-asleep brain recognized it as my grandma, until I looked harder and made sense of where I actually was. That didn't make sense for a lot of reasons. The main two being, she's my mom's mom, therefore having no relation to anyone here except me. She was still alive and well on my home island at the time. She didn't pass away until about a decade after this incident. After I glanced over at my aunt and her enormous boyfriend sleeping where they're supposed to be, I glanced at the front door thinking maybe someone broke in. From where I was, I could see that the chain was still on the door. So was the heavy-duty padlock, meaning that the only way that locked door is opening is from the inside. The only window in her place was still intact as well. My heart was pounding at this point, and the figure still hadn't moved at all. I rubbed my eyes and pinched myself one last time, hoping I was dreaming. Please, I thought to myself, as I slowly started to lower my body back onto the mattress, keeping my eyes on whatever it was that refused to go away. Please keep us safe and don't let anyone see anything. I stealthily flipped on my other side to face the wall and pulled the covers over my head. I didn't care how hot it was. I was not going to see the face of this thing, nor was I going to feel, hear, or witness anything it ends up doing. I silently prayed more to my parents as God and had so much fear and adrenaline coursing through me, I thought I would never end up falling asleep. I genuinely had it in my mind that something was about to happen to me. Miracles do happen, as after a millennia passed, I did indeed fall asleep through the rest of the night without any further disturbances. I don't recall what happened the following day, but all I know is nothing was out of place. No evidence of someone MacGyvering their way into the house, and no one else mentioned anything about what I saw. I tell my dad's mom about this recently, and she genuinely believes that I'm sensitive to anything spiritual or paranormal. She has her reasons, but that's another story. For some reason, I haven't been able to find it in me to agree with her about being sensitive. Maybe it's because I fear these types of encounters, so I consciously shut this stuff out. Maybe because I'm just too skeptical. All I know is I'd like to never experience seeing a spooky spectral stranger in the middle of the night ever again. Scary Shadow Person. This just happened. I'm freaking out. By ArsenicRainbows. Okay, my heart is going so fast, I'm shaking, so I'm sorry if I mistype. It's 3:47 a.m. as I write this. I have often seen shapes in the dark that look like hooded figures or like a black mass. I've always felt a little creeped out by them, but just figured it was my brain playing tricks, trying to fill in the blank space. I've also had sleep paralysis before, seen a ghost in a hat and trench coat, and have had items move right in front of me, with witnesses. But this is something I have never had happen before. I woke up randomly 47 minutes ago, at 3 a.m. like I do most nights. I noticed a black mass in the corner of the room. It stood up. It was 7 feet tall at least, with an oval-shaped head, pronounced shoulders, long arms, and equally long legs. It was thin, tall, and stood straight, just looking at me. Had no face, just a black void. It turned to the right, bent down, and I, at first calmly, asked my fiancée to turn on the light. Then it stood back up and walked to the right side of the room, my side of the bedroom. It leaned over the bed as though checking the sheets, then stood up again and walked to the bottom of the bed. At this point, I'm going crazy, shouting, "Turn on your light," as this thing starts crawling up the bed towards me. Edit, update. I have spoken to my significant other about me trying to wake him up. He said he heard me the first time but couldn't see anything, was half asleep, and it took him a minute or so to 1. Wake up, and 2. Find his watch, which has a torch on it, and was on the floor, and it was dark and in the middle of the night. Then, once the light went on, it vanished, but I had been hiding under the covers and my fiancé had to bring a lamp into the room, so I didn't have to sit in the dark. I can't sleep with the light on, but right now, I'm too scared. Can someone tell me what on earth I've just witnessed? And any suggestions are welcome on how I might get it to leave. Update. I think I've made it angry. I can hear shuffling around the bed, but nothing's there. And I just heard a whisper in a feminine voice. It's just me and my fiancé in here, and he's asleep. Update 2. It's 3:44 when I woke up tonight. It's the following night to the story I mentioned above, 4 a.m. as I write this. I heard a slamming door in the hallway. I have checked, but everyone is in bed. Luckily, I haven't seen anything yet tonight, possibly because I have the light on. And I have taken countermeasures. Nothing in my room tonight, thankfully, but I still feel like I'm being watched. Tall Shadow Figure with a Smile by Viper on Fire. Last night, I was staying out all night with my girlfriend. This is the second time we've done it. We went to this shed place in a park. Let me describe it to you. It's roughly 6 by 3 meters with open doors on both sides, and the walls have little open plank bits in them, and circular plastic windows. We had put a blanket down on the floor and used our bags as pillows. We also had another weighted blanket over us. Anyway, we were both laying down with our eyes closed, cuddling, when suddenly we hear that like a cartoon sound. Almost like in a kid's cartoon. We peek our heads up and we see out the window. There's this really tall black figure. Keep in mind, we both don't know it's really tall yet. I'll specify in a second. With literally no definition on its body, just a pitch black figure, and the only thing you can see is a wide, white smile. It's staring at us, and it's got its long arms slightly outstretched from its sides. As soon as we both look at it, it's like its smile disappears, and now it's walking away to our left in an almost marching motion. We didn't even see it turn its body. It walks into a blind spot, which was because there was a little wooden wall in the way there, and we both peer out the door expecting to see it carry on walking out of the blind spot, and it's just gone. We both think it's really weird, but shrug it off as just a person in the park opening the gates or something. A few minutes later, we hear those exact same cartoon sounds, and this time we're paranoid, so we investigate. We realize where it was standing before it walked away was next to the support beam for a zip line. This support beam had to be at least 12 feet tall. We didn't realize this figure was so tall at first because the plastic window we saw him through was warped, making the structure and figure seem smaller. This is when we both start to freak out, because of the fact that it could have been the shadow man that has haunted us both. Earlier that night, we sat in the woods maybe 2 or 3 miles away from the park. We're talking, and all of a sudden I'm paranoid because I kept hearing branches snap, and could have swore I saw movement in the corner of my eye. This makes me think about the shadow man who's been randomly appearing at times in my life, whether it's daylight or not. I tell my girlfriend, and before I mention that it's a tall black shadow figure, she says, "Oh, please don't go there." I say, "Tall black shadow figure?" And she says yes, and explains how she used to see it every day, in the daytime peering at her from behind a tree, roughly 5 times per day. I could tell when I described the figure, she was genuinely surprised to hear that I had the same experience. Is it a coincidence that I have a run-in with the figure the same day I'm talking about it? Did I manifest it back into existence? Or was it listening to me talking about it? I don't believe in the paranormal, but by the crawling chaos. I don't believe in the paranormal, but a curious thing just happened to me. Well, it's almost 9 p.m., it's already dark, and my parents are not home. I was quietly in the kitchen listening to music with my headphones and eating something standing up. It all happened so fast. I turned my head slightly to the side, and I swear on my life, I saw a person-sized figure a couple of meters away from me. I freaked out a little, but the thought came to me that it was my mother, only to realize that my parents are not home. It all happened in a matter of a second, and when I looked again, there was nothing. To expand on that, what I saw during that instant was a blur-sized figure of an adult. I emphasize that. It looked like a blur rather than something physical. It was white, and on top of its body, on the head part, the blur was black. Do you understand? As if it had clothes from the neck down. And that's why there was a contrast between the color of its face and the clothes. It wasn't something I saw out of the corner of my eye. I saw it in the center of my vision from a slight movement. Right outside the kitchen door. Everything was illuminated. It was not a visual confusion. I just wanted to tell. I'm not even scared now. I've already said I'm skeptical, but that moment was creepy. I thought some of you would enjoy the story. I saw a figure. In a split second, it was gone. By the man himself, 5'6'4". So a little background info. Earlier, in 2021, my family decided to go to Charleston, South Carolina. Hearing that there's an aircraft carrier there, I'm a World War II person. I wanted to take a tour, so we dedicated a day so I could with my family. We were in the chain locker. I don't know if it was called that. I was first in, so last out. We were walking in there for about 5 minutes and talking to the guide about the ship's history. Upon walking out, I saw an intersection of 3 corridors, 1 facing me and 2 crossing. I didn't notice it before, and studied it for a second before I turned my head to go to the room. A black figure ran through the corridors like a drill was happening. Though this ship is sitting in mud, I got out quick and went to the front. This was the USS Yorktown. It has a history for being haunted by figures dating back to the 1940s. Several YouTube videos on it are available. All the figures that have been seen, late at night particularly, a few shadows running like the ship was under attack. I don't think I'll be doing that again for a while. It was a really cool place to visit if you like history. Something is following and targeting me by Panianaya. About 20 years ago, I lived in an apartment. I would hear knocking on the ceiling quite often. I asked the woman across the hall about it, and she replied, "Oh, that's just a spirit. It stopped once you moved in." A bit after the knocking started, odd things would happen around the apartment. Things would be moved, windows closed, lights turned off. Things you would say that I just forgot that I had done. Well, one night, I looked out my bedroom and saw the light from my computer on in the other room. I went in and the screensaver was off. When I went back to my room, I laid down on the bed facing the other room to see if it happened again. It wasn't long before I felt something touch my backside. It was a forceful touch. From that time on, I would wake up with 4 scratches on each shoulder at least once a week. I switched bedrooms. The scratches stopped, but every time I was going to see my boyfriend, my keys would come up missing. I would find them in the oddest places, even though I knew I wouldn't put them in the bathtub, the kitchen cupboards, or my dresser. I brushed it off like I'd just misplaced them myself. My boyfriend stayed over one night, and in the morning, He had asked me what I'd done to him the previous evening. He showed me his neck. He had 4 scratches on one side and 1 on the other. It was as if someone grabbed his neck with one hand and scratched him. That was the last time he came over, and I soon found out that he was not a good person. I moved out of the apartment into a home with 2 friends. I took a bungalow bedroom. I could hear someone running in the attic every night. It stopped once I put a cross over the door. Other odd things happened. One night, we were going to my aunt's home to get my cousin's Ouija board. I distinctively saw someone in our basement when I was the last one to leave. My roommates would also hear someone walking around my bedroom when I wasn't home. A year later, I moved into my current home. My cousin moved in with me for a little bit. She would always say that she could hear someone walking in my bedroom when nobody was home. Nothing much different from the happenings from my apartment happened until I met my husband. That's when the traditional haunting thing started. Doors closing, things falling, lights flickering, brand new light fixtures breaking. One night, when my husband was away and I was working the night shift, I came home to find my back door wide open and the police pulling up. Someone had used a crowbar to remove a window to rob my home. My neighbor saw them taking things from my home and called the police. Had he not called, I would have walked in on them. Almost exactly 1 year later, someone broke into my home again and brutally murdered my husband. Again, I would have been home, but someone stopped me from going home right then. There's been some small things that have occurred between the 2 events and many more since. A car was speeding down the road and driving erratically. It would have hit my home, but it hit a tree and changed its course. 2 dogs were hit by a speeding car in front of my home. The dog that I currently have was hit by a car. Someone attempted to steal my daughter's car, but the alarm went off well after they were in the car. I had a beautiful Doberman that died of cancer when she was only 2 years old. Those are just some of the out-of-the-ordinary events that have happened in the past 5 years. 1 or 2 of these events would be normal, but all of them at the same home in a 5-year span? I am convinced that whatever was in my apartment followed me. However, I do not think that it is malevolent. I think that it was protecting me like it did with my boyfriend. What I am convinced of is that there is something very evil in my home. I say this because I would hear a very odd sound from outside. My dog would hear it. One night, my camera sent a notification that it captured the sound. It sent chills up my spine, and I told my children not to let any of the dogs out. I did investigate the area the next day, and I could not find any signs of animals. I can't attach the video with the sounds, but I was told by a medium that it sounds like a demon. I also have a sleep app that records while I sleep. Many times it says that I am snoring, but it actually sounds like a death rattle. On one occasion, I had woken in the middle of the night and heard it myself. One of the recordings actually had some other sound at the very end that is overlapping the rattle. Another recording had me talking in my sleep, saying that something is heavy. Then, you can hear what sounds like footsteps walking away. Recently, my son moved out of the home. I have put my dog's food, water, crate, and toys in the room. The past 2 days, my dog refuses to go in there. She used to go in there if he was in there, but now, it's to the point that I literally have to take her food out of the room or she will not eat. I unfortunately can't attach video and audio clips for evaluation, but I will if I'm able to at a later date. I am open to any advice. Moving isn't an option. I may be stupid, but I feel as if my husband is in the home, and if I move, I will be leaving him. What follows is actual video footage from Panianaya. Please listen carefully.
This is fucking heavy.
Possessed Haunted Mirror in House by sammiebud. I used to live in a house with my parents, which both myself and my parents had very strange experiences. However, my parents didn't let me know that they had them, as they didn't want to spook me further. My room was particularly bad with the activities that used to happen all the time. Just to name a few experiences, there was someone knocking on my door saying my name when everyone was asleep. My guitar plectrum was thrown at me from across the room, and my guitar was often strung, all 6 strings, all at the same time. Obviously, if a string goes out of tune, sometimes one will strum, but all 6 was definitely no accident. Anyway, I had this antique mirror for as long as I could remember. It was a past relative's, and I always used to notice handprints and fingerprints on it, even though I never touched it that much. They were everywhere from top to bottom. My parents, obviously not wanting to let me know they were also aware of the paranormal things going on, said to me not to worry about it. It was probably me touching it by mistake, etc. As they seemed so sure this was the case, I forced myself not to think about it and carry on as if nothing weird was happening, which was very hard as something was definitely going on. Eventually, my mom told me she was also concerned about my mirror and needed to speak to me about something she'd seen other than handprints. She never showed me the photo she took because she didn't want to scare me, but she said in the prints on the mirror was the perfect face of a devil. She showed my dad and his friends before taking a photo, and despite them not wanting to believe in this side of things, they both could see it too. Obviously, I didn't know how to react and thought perhaps something was after me. I mean, who knows? Mom decided to get advice, so she had gone to a shop near me called Spellbound. They sold things of all types, but mainly they were all to do with the supernatural type of things, healing crystals, etc. As you can imagine, the people who worked there all were very aware of the spiritual world and different types of paranormal experiences, so my mom felt this was the best place to get advice. She spoke to a guy there about my mirror, who said we had a few options, which were smashing the mirror completely to get rid of any negative energy, moving the mirror away from reflecting onto me or my bed, sage the room, or for me to wear a black tourmaline, either in a necklace or bracelet form to help protect me. I wasn't worried if we needed to smash the mirror, as I was pretty terrified by this point. However, my parents didn't want to do this, as it used to belong to one of my relatives who wasn't with us anymore. So my mom bought me the black tourmaline, and we went on from there. I still noticed the fingerprints, handprints, but not so much strange experiences, which I felt perhaps the tourmaline worked. My mom did go back to Spellbound and spoke to the same guy again regarding that she thinks the tourmaline worked, but there's still handprints, where he said again it might just be worth smashing the mirror. He began to explain how mirrors could be portals for demons or another life, and by keeping the mirror, we could potentially be letting them directly into my room. It is extremely dangerous. My parents still did not want to smash the mirror. Typical. So I ended up taking it with me when I moved out a few months later, with every intention to smash it on my own time without them knowing. Well, when I first moved in, I did use it now and then to get changed, etc. while I was looking for a new mirror. I was skint, but I would hang a towel over it when I wasn't using it. Anyway, one day my boyfriend put it up a bit higher in the bathroom to shave or something, I don't know. And he made sure it was secure so I had no way of falling. I'd put it in the same position before, and I can literally 99.99999% tell you it could not fall. But as you can probably tell, it did. He left it for literally a few seconds to grab a towel, and with that time, there was a huge bang and then a smash. The mirror literally shattered into tiny pieces, like even if I wanted to repair it, which I definitely didn't, there would have been no possible way. To this day, I believe that some sort of guardian angel or fate broke that mirror because as soon as I moved in with the mirror, the flat felt uneasy, and as soon as we disposed of it, I felt so much better living there. Whether whatever was attached to the mirror followed me to the flat when I took it, I don't know, but nevertheless, I'm so glad that I'm not dealing with that anymore. Please don't ask me why I didn't smash it sooner. It's hard when you're 18 living with family to try and get your way, as I'm sure you are all aware. Sorry for the long post. Spirits have followed me to work. By Just a Random Guy, 1803. I have shared experiences from my past on here, with various encounters with the paranormal. I feel like spirits are drawn to me as they follow me to wherever I move. I have been living in my current house for 2 years now, the typical amount of time it takes for the phenomena to resume after a move. I will begin by recounting an experience at my first house though. I typically awake at 5 for work, and I'm always the first person to rise during the day. This was a Thursday, and like always, I was the first person up. My bedroom is located on the second story, while the living areas and bathroom are on the first. I got dressed before heading downstairs as always. I make my way to the first story without turning on any lights, lest I wake up others. The house was quiet, and I made my way to the staircase. At the base of the stairs is a bookshelf. It is full of books, but not overly full. This is important. We also do not live in an area that ever sees seismic activity. Also important. I was 3/4 of the way down the stairs when something dark moved in front of me, and several books tumbled from the bookshelf. Right next to the bookshelf is a window, and there's enough ambient light that comes through from the streetlight that I can see pretty well. I froze and pulled out my cell phone to turn on the flashlight. There was nothing there. The shape I had seen was far too large to have been a mouse, and too high up for that matter. If I had to qualify the size, I would say that it was as large as a 10 or 11-year-old child. There were 3 books that had fallen. Each one of them were children's books too. Now to work. I am always the first to arrive. Starting around 2 weeks ago, I began to notice a bad smell that would randomly come and go from my office. At first, I thought a mouse had died in the wall or ceiling, but as I said, the smell would come and go, sometimes for days. There were spots in the company that I would go where I felt a chill run down my spine, giving me that feeling that I was being watched. I would also hear random noises that I could not explain away, as I was alone. That same Thursday, however, I heard a distinct voice. It was faint and belonged to a man. I thought that one of the other guys had arrived and was outside talking on a cell. My office is located pretty close to the main entrance, so this was a logical assumption. I got up from my desk to walk out the front door, a trip that takes at the most 10 seconds. No one was there, and my car was the only vehicle in the lot. This morning, I heard a woman's voice and smelled a floral scent which was replaced by the strong smell of death that I had been smelling randomly. I knew I was not alone, so I decided to try and communicate. I asked aloud what this thing wanted of me, but got no response, except that smell vanished again. My only concern, as I have dealt with spirits since I was 14, was that, because of the extremely foul smell, that something malicious had located me. I will keep you all posted in further developments. These are the strongest interactions I have ever had. My family joked that I'm haunted, but now I think they're being serious. By Twisted Harley, 1106. Ever since I was a kid, I used to freak out my family with knowing things that there was no way I should know, and interacting with things that weren't there. I don't even remember most of it, just from what they've all told me throughout the years. When I was about 14, I started noticing weird things happening in the house, such as the usual floorboards creaking, the banisters on the stairs starting to shake, and doors closing on their own. Then more things, personal to me, started happening, like I was being singled out from the family. My room was permanently freezing, even with the doors and windows shut and the radiator on full blast. Mold started to grow in just one spot on my wall and would come back whenever we got rid of it. Called the landlord who got someone out, but they said there was no issue after inspecting the wall behind the wallpaper and the floorboards. Then there was constantly the smell of cigarette smoke in my room, and any drink I had would smell like week-old wine after a couple of hours, but only in my room. One night, I could hear someone crying in my room. I walked in thinking it was my sister, but it wasn't, so I called her into my room and she could hear it too. Our house was the corner house on the street, and my mom was on the far side of the house, so it wasn't connected to any other houses or rooms apart from my mom's room, but she was downstairs. So there is no way it was a neighbor crying through the wall. A couple of nights after that, I had sleep paralysis and woke up to the weight of something pinning down my ankles. All I could see was this dark shadow at the end of my bed. I was so scared, but eventually drifted back off after just watching this thing for what felt like hours. The next morning, I had bruises on my ankles in the shape of fingers. We eventually moved, and the house I have now was newly renovated, but was built on the side of an old Victorian workhouse. The old front building still stands and was turned into flats. In this house, much doesn't happen apart from sometimes things moving on their own, unless it's in my bedroom. All my family have claimed to have seen the same black figure in my room. Just a huge black shadow in the shape of a large man. Every night my bed dips as if someone has sat on the end, and there's always the feeling of someone watching me. I was also meditating one night, and when I opened my eyes, I was swarmed with a black smoke-like mass all around me, which vanished into thin air after a couple of seconds. We call the figure Benny as a joke. After doing some research into my house, we found that someone was murdered in the man-made river at the end of my road, which was built during Victorian times. And the guy who did it was called Benjamin, which really freaked my sister out because our nickname was so close to this alleged murderer. My mom said either we just attracted paranormal activity, or I'm being followed by something. We don't know what to make of it. I come from a pagan family with my mom being a white witch, and me also beginning to learn, so we often cleanse the house with sage and other methods, but nothing seems to work, which is why my family think it could be attracted to me in some way. A Haunting in a Hotel by Purple Hyena 01. For about 2 years, I worked in a hotel in the mountains. For privacy reasons, I will not be saying where or the name of the hotel. It was a relatively young hotel, but the land it was on was old, dating back to the early 1900s. It had about 14 floors, including 2 levels of parking garages and a sort of attic area that made up the top 2 floors. This area was used for storage and where the brunt of the activity took place. Things happened sporadically. The occasional shadow figure walking in the halls, motion lights turning on by themselves. The one on the 12th floor, I used to sit and watch it turn on by itself. And it took a lot to get these things to register. The popular story with the employees was it was the spirit of a child. I had to disagree with them. For one thing, the sensations I would get from that floor was not human, much less a child. Not demonic though. More like an elemental would be the best way to describe it. That, and 2 personal experiences left little doubt as to what was up there. My mom and I had a sort of a game, where we would take pictures of the creepy spots we worked and send them to each other. I went up to the 11th, 12th floor and started snapping away. As I took a shot of the 12th floor from the stairs, I went up to get another angle. I suddenly got the feeling that I should not be doing that. I decided not to take the pic and started back down the stairs, when a little voice in the back of my head told me to be careful. Later that day, I was moving one of the big, giant linen carts through a doorway, something I had done thousands of times by that point, when my little finger got caught between the linen cart and a door frame. I had to wear a splint for a few weeks. When I told my mom, she advised I apologize to whatever was up there, which I did, and warned the new people not to take pictures up there, but they would just laugh at me. The second experience was about a month later, on the 10th floor. I was looking for one of my supervisors and saw him at the end of the hall, and watched him go into a room. I went down to the room and found no one there, I went back to the storage room, and there he was, saying he had been on the second floor the whole time. So this thing could mimic. There were other things while I worked around that area, but those are for another time. I've since left that hotel and still wonder what the nature of it was. I do know this, however. It doesn't like its picture taken. My Village is Haunted by author Chan21. I come from a small fishing village in Alaska. Our residents never surpassed 400 people living in the village at a time. Back in the 30s, the village was relocated due to constant flooding. In our new village, we have homes, a school, 2 tribal offices, a boys and girls club, a post office, a church, and a graveyard. The graveyard sits atop a big hill down by the beach, away from the rest of the village. Recently, we had to expand the graveyard because we were running out of plots. This is relevant to what I'm going to say. My village is haunted. Not just 1 or 2 houses or the school, the whole village. The spirits wander and have been seen walking up and down the roads, going into buildings or homes. Per every small town, everyone has a story. Some hear babies crying in the woods, hear their dead relatives calling to them, or see dead relatives walk past them and disappear just as they catch up to them. Like everyone else in my village, I've had a couple encounters that will stay with me, and I've told them here on Reddit. What I can't understand, however, is why they're wandering the earth. I have a couple theories, and I thought I would post here for some feedback. Theory 1. After being forced to adopt Russian Orthodox Christianity during the Russian colonization, I don't think my ancestors are pleased about the whole being buried for all eternity bit. Maybe we are not supposed to be buried. Theory 2. They have unresolved issues or don't know they're dead. They seem to be going on about their day, not attempting to reach out or see us. Theory 3. My grandma tells me of her mom's uncle, who was a shaman. She said he tried to curse a man, but my grandmother's brother got in the way. My grandma's brother drowned at 12 years old. The shaman was so upset, he cursed the man's entire village to always be thirsty. My grandma said her friend from that village always chews on ice, which makes her question that curse to this day. I wonder if that curse ended up cursing my whole village for decades to come. I talk about the curses because recently, we've had 2 to 4 deaths a year for a few years now. Please let me know your thoughts about why they can't move on and rest. Is My House Haunted? By Litchi Aries. Hello everyone. I'm a 16-year-old girl situated in India with my parents and my sister. We live on a street which is quiet, and we don't get sounds except for occasions like someone's wedding and things like that. I live in a building where everyone moved out, leaving only my family and another guy's family. For a few months, we were experiencing paranormal stuff, but they were unnoticeable. But for the last few days, it's been getting out of hand, and it's noticeable, even after I did everything that was on my mind, like use sage. I will list a few of my experiences here, but before that, I'll explain how my house is. The main door and the living room are attached together, and it has a small washroom for guests. We don't use that washroom except cleaning it once a week. And 2 rooms. The very first experience happened in the living room. Me, my sister, and my mother were chilling, sitting on the couch when my sister pointed at something. I didn't care at first, but when I saw something in front of the living room washroom, the door was open. It was a shadow of a whole person, walking, and then it disappeared. We instantly checked the washroom and no one was inside. And there wasn't something that would cause a shadow of a moving person. Then we saw stuff like sculptures moving, doors automatically opening. Then, this experience happened in the living room once again. The washroom door was open and I looked at it, and I caught a glimpse of a white face, fully white. Black spots on the place where eyes are supposed to be, and then it vanished. This morning, I placed my pair of earphones on the middle of the stool and I sat down on the bed. After a few minutes, I heard a noise, and naturally I looked up to see my earphones floating in midair for half a second, and then it fell on the ground. The same incident happened to me when I was doing chores one day in the kitchen, but with a spatula. I've had more experiences about this. My biggest question is my house haunted? Any recommendations on what I should do? Mutant? Native American spirit? Roswell alien? What did I encounter? By Farlow 6493. Just a few years ago, my friends and I decided to take a road trip to Santa Fe, New Mexico. I had just turned 18 and thought it would be fun to pack up the car with the boys and hit the road. Santa Fe had always seemed interesting to me, as I had never really known or heard much about New Mexico. The drive was thrilling, full of laughs and good music. We checked into our hotel and settled in. We were staying at Hotel Santa Fe, an adobe-style hotel in the very center of the very small town. The town felt strange from the get-go. Maybe it was just me, and would love any listeners to explain why, but there was a few odd things about the town. First of all, most businesses close early, around 5 or so, and when they close, they close. Doors are locked and lights are out. It seems all the locals are nowhere to be found, or asleep by 8. Santa Fe gives off eerie vibes. It's definitely a spiritual small town, but at times it felt like something more sinister is going on, something in the air. But I digress. After settling down into our rooms, we hit the streets to walk and get a bite to eat and shop. There wasn't much that interested our group, as we were all teenage boys, and the town is more geared towards older retirees or avid Southwestern art collectors. But nevertheless, we were still considerate of the culture and full of curiosity, which would later be a poor mistake. As the evening came, the sky filled with a beautiful pink sunset. Most of my friends in the group were tired and ready to relax over some beers back at the room, but my closest friend and I still weren't satisfied. We chilled at the room with the group until late into the night and everyone fell asleep, but our raging curiosity still wasn't cured. You see, me and my friend John were avid urban explorers. We loved exploring abandoned buildings and had a lot of experience. We even made a social media account where we would post pictures and videos of our findings. Now that we were in Santa Fe, we were thrilled to get out and explore the unknown. 2 a.m. rolled around and we snuck out of our hotel room, careful not to wake the others, and set to the streets for adventure. When we stepped outside, into the night, we were greeted with a very peculiar experience. The town was desolate, like nothing I'd ever seen before. Not a soul was out. So much so we walked down the middle of the street because there wasn't a car in sight. It was slightly unsettling, as it still felt like we were being watched. An uncanny feeling. The best way I can explain how quiet it is there at night was when we walked down the street, we approached an intersection and jokingly stood under the traffic lights. The town was so empty and quiet we could actually hear the bulb click on the light change from red to green. It was an odd feeling being the only ones out. I've been in towns at night before, and yes, it's quiet, but there's still the occasional bar open with some distant music or the occasional homeless persons. But believe me when I say Santa Fe was empty. We proceeded to explore the town, climbing on top of a few buildings to get pictures and exploring a few buildings. But our curiosity still wasn't cured. We decided to continue walking until we came to a nearby river. Hoping we could find a nearby drainage tunnel we could explore, we proceeded. As we approached the river, we noticed there was a small tunnel, bridge that went over the river. As we walked through the brush and approached the water, we got a better look into the tunnel. It looked like there was a dim light coming from under the bridge. We walked closer and closer without our flashlights on, just enjoying the moonlight. There we were, standing at the mouth of the tunnel. Suddenly, John whispered to me, "Wow, do you see that?" We were met with an unsettling view of about 10 to 15 candles on the ground lighting up the underside of the bridge. We proceeded to walk in and check out what was going on. Suddenly, we heard movement that broke the silence. That's when we immediately turned on our flashlights and focused them into the tunnel. There was a figure sitting on the ground. At first, I couldn't tell if it was a pile of rocks and my eyes were playing tricks on me. We got closer and the figure moved. That's when I felt my heart start pounding, but tried to reassure myself, thinking maybe it's just a homeless person. I focused my flashlight to a smaller beam that would illuminate the figure. We stopped in our tracks and just stood there staring at what my light was fixed on. A bald man with absolutely no hair or anything on the back of his head, just sitting there, looking the opposite direction. My light was shining directly on the back of his head. We stood there for a good 10 seconds just waiting for him to turn his head around. That's when we realized its head was facing us. I shined my light a bit lower to illuminate its torso. This thing, had absolutely no face. Just perfectly smooth. No ears either. Nothing. Just sitting there. Still. It felt like it was staring at us, but there were no eyes. We both realized we were looking at it at the same time. John whispered to me, where's its face? That's when it got up. At this moment, I felt my blood run cold. It picked something up off the ground and we ran. We ran so fast I felt for the first time I was legitimately running for my life. As we exited the tunnel, we ran to the higher ground and got to the top of the bridge so the mouth of the tunnel was below us. I shined my flashlight down onto the ground. That's when I saw the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. The thing came out of the tunnel and just stood there. It stepped into the light of my flashlight. It was holding what looked like some sort of weapon, almost like a metal pitchfork or trident, and looked directly at us. There we were, just frozen. I shined my flashlight directly on its face once more, and for a good 20 seconds we just stood there in complete terror as it stood there motionless. No face, just smooth skin. There were a few features on the top of its balded head, almost like horns, but I'm not sure what they were. Then suddenly, it started bolting toward us. That's when we heard it. It made a strange sound. The best I could describe it would be an angry hum. Like if you were to scream with your mouth closed. Well, this thing was angry, running towards us, waving its pitchfork thing in the air. We ran as fast as we could back to the hotel. We finally made it back, still shaking. I felt sick with adrenaline. As we caught our breath in the elevator, we both looked at each other. The next day, we didn't even bother telling the rest of the group. 1, because we knew it sounded too unbelievable, and 2, because we were both too shaken up about it. To this day, we still don't talk about what we saw, but recently John mentioned it to me. We were talking about the trip as he lowered his voice and said, "You saw that too, right?" Looking back, I did decide to do some research on New Mexico, finding out that the government has done many secret experiments in the desert, and the area has many Indian burial grounds. The land is a cocktail for the uncanny. I often wonder if what we saw was some mutant human as a result of the Manhattan Project, a nuclear test done in the middle of the desert of New Mexico. There are rumors that the government not only tested their bombs on test-built structures, but humans. Maybe we saw a mutant, or maybe it was some sort of native spirit, but I'm still not much of a supernatural believer. Regardless, I will never be able to explain what I saw that night, and will never forget the view of that faceless man looking at me. Personal Account of the Not Deer, North Carolina, Tennessee, by Nate O'Potato. This is a bit of a long one, so grab your popcorn and buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. For my college screenwriting class, we were split into groups, 4 students each, for a group project. The assignment was to select a myth or legend to base a 10 to 15 page screenplay on. My group thought it would be interesting to choose a cryptid for the project rather than a well-known historical myth or legend. Our teacher cleared us for the idea, and we started brainstorming. Of course, we didn't want the most well-known cryptids like the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot, so we started looking up some of the lesser-known ones. One of the ones that somebody pitched was the not deer, also known as the night deer in some cases. According to people's stories, it looked almost exactly like a large deer, but something felt horribly off. Only when they drove away did they realize what was specifically wrong about it. Still, Even before they understood exactly what was going on, every story mentioned the overwhelming sense of wrongness. Quoting someone else's personal account, it was a deer in the way the graveyard is a playground. You can treat it as such, I guess, but it won't feel the same. Lo and behold, after a bit of research, I found out it was located in North Carolina. Not only that, but it was just over an hour away. Just about every written or publicized story of the not deer supposedly took place in Boone County, North Carolina, and its surrounding areas. I informed the group of what I discovered and, being as spontaneous as I am, told them I'm driving out to the location that very night. I figured I probably wouldn't come across anything, even though I was legitimately curious. At the very least, it was something interesting to do, and I'd be able to accurately describe the location and ambiance of the area to the main screenwriter. I wasn't able to convince the other 3 of my group to go with me. They all had their legitimate reasons, and since I made the decision to go suddenly, I understood why none of them wanted to go with me on the trip. Still, I had nothing else to do that night, and I'd been itching for more travel ever since the entire pandemic started. I filled my roommate in on everything and asked if he wanted to go with me. At first, he told me that he would just consider it, but as I was getting ready to go, he told me that he decided to tag along. One of the main reasons for doing so was that he felt like he had to go with me. I shrugged it off, not thinking much of what he said. After filling up my car with some extra gas and buying a couple snacks for the road, I plugged Boone, North Carolina into my GPS and headed out. My roommate and I were pretty relaxed for the majority of the ride there. We joked around, listened to all sorts of music through the radio and CD player, and had some whatever snacks we had brought earlier. Eventually we got close to Boone. That's when we started to feel like something was off. It wasn't a feeling strong enough to make us want to turn around, but it was worth mentioning to each other. When we got into the city, it was just about what we imagined. Gas stations, car dealerships, dollar stores, and small cafes. All of them were closed at that time, with the time of arrival in Boone County around 9-10 p.m. But all of them were well lit and unintimidating. My roommate told me that we should probably head back around 9:30, and that he had let me know when that time came around. I agreed with him since I didn't want to spend too long searching for an experience. Needless to say, we didn't come across anything by 9:30. He decided to let us keep going for another half an hour. The clock on my car's dash had been broken for a while now, and I couldn't look at my phone while I was driving, so I was totally reliant on him for the time. Had I known that we were going to be driving in the area past 9:30, I probably would have mentioned it and turned around sooner. Had I done that, I would have completely missed the experience we ended up having. I'm still unsure whether or not that would have been a good thing. We ended up in Tennessee by 9:50. That's when things started to get bad. At this point, we rarely come across any other cars on the highway. We took the first 2 exits we saw and ended up driving along more mountainous, forested roads. This meant that there were lots of tall, dark trees and almost no streetlights, and twisting roads that forced you to slow down. My roommate said he started to feel bad about the whole situation, and I agreed wholeheartedly. Still, there was nowhere to turn, so we continued going straight since that was really the only option for the time being. A few different times, we got a serious sense of dread, but usually that feeling disappeared by the time we got to the next section of the road. There were a couple times that both of us started to tear up, not because we were sad or upset, but because it felt so wrong to be there. Like it was somewhere where we weren't supposed to be. The feeling of dread was very particular too. It wasn't feeling bad in the sense of depression or anxiety. The best way to describe it was a sense of wrongness. It seemed to come in waves, not sticking around for a long time, but not going away entirely either. By this point, my GPS had stopped working entirely. Both my roommate's phone and my phone said that they had full bars, but mine simply refused to connect to anything. Luckily, his GPS still worked fine, so he plugged in the directions for home. It continued taking us down the road for a while longer. The area started to become more forested as we went on, and the road started to twist and turn much more than it had before. Basically, we had come across the exact area where you would expect a monster to be, and we started to feel really, really bad. I don't think I can express the feeling well enough with words, but it was the worst we had felt so far. but we knew something wasn't right. We both felt like we weren't supposed to be there. We felt like we needed to get out. Since my roommate started getting truly spooked, that put me on edge even more since he never gets scared by anything. There wasn't much we could do about it though. The GPS wanted us to follow the road, so we awaited its next directions, eager to get on the highway back home. The sense of dread still came and went with every other segment of the road we crossed. Eventually, the GPS wanted us to turn. My roommate told me to turn right on that road. I knew he meant to turn right onto the road and follow it straight ahead, but for some reason, I figured we should turn around and backtrack. I started slowing down and we both started to feel seriously bad, like things were very wrong and something was about to happen bad. It was worse than we had felt along the entire trip so far. My roommate said my eyes were glazed over as I kept saying something along the lines, "I just need to turn around right here," over and over. The more I said it, the quieter I got until I was almost at a whisper. Keep in mind that I'm normally a fairly loud person, and I had been loud the entire drive up until this point. I pulled off onto a gravel dip on the side of the road. Along the gravel dip was a thin chicken wire fence, shiny and silver. Back on the road behind us was a wall of dirt and rock. We were surrounded by tall, dark trees that blocked most of the night sky. Even with the headlights on, it was difficult to see very far ahead. He said, very forcefully, that we couldn't stop and we needed to keep going because he felt seriously bad. But I wasn't listening to him. I wasn't quite processing what he was saying, and for some reason, I was having a difficult time hearing him at all. After he realized he wasn't getting through to me, he broke into a literal shout and told me we had to get out of there because we could not stop and we could not go back that way. It took him using his road rage yell to snap me out of it and to get me to speed down the road. The only word I can use to describe what I felt in that moment was absolute terror. Even as I was slowing down, I felt it get worse and worse until it was almost overwhelming. I only realized that after we had gotten out of the area and back onto the highway. As we passed through the area and started getting into the city again, the looming sense of dread started to fade away. By the time we got onto the main highway, we felt safe again. But in that moment that I pulled off onto the gravel dip on the road, where I had almost stopped the car entirely, that was the most terrifying experience I've ever had in my life. I would bet my life savings that had we turned around, we would have seen something we never wanted to. Both of us admitted to tearing up as we both drove off from that spot. I was much more shaken up than my roommate was, and it took a little while for me to fully process what actually happened. I think it's safe to say, even though I didn't explicitly see anything for myself, I found exactly what I was looking for. Something Strange in the Woods Behind My House by Mr. Ghostwork. I will preface this by stating that the information I'm about to share with you is not a creepypasta or any other form of fiction. It is in fact my complete and honest recollection of the unexplained experiences I observed in and around the wooded area behind my childhood home. Other people in my family noted much the same while growing up there, and our stories match now that we are all decades older. I'm not saying I believe in skinwalkers, Sasquatches, or any other cryptids, as I am a man of science. I cannot ignore the lack of reliable and testable evidence in regards to such creatures actually existing. That being said, something very terrifying and unexplained lived or lives in the woods behind that house. Occurrence number 1. My sister and I just received a tin as a gift from our grandfather. He had smoked enough Marlboro Red cigarettes and sent in the UPCs to get a massive Marlboro tent. My mom hated it. We, however, loved it and immediately set it up on the property line behind the house. We intended on spending the night out there, but after an hour or so, we experienced something neither of us can explain to this day. We saw an indention drag itself across the tent, and we heard it dragging as it went. It was like a giant finger, or maybe a log, something of that size. My sister cried out, and I immediately bolted outside, as I was convinced it was our father playing a prank on us. Upon exiting the tent, I was greeted by nothing. There was nothing there. I searched the area briefly before grabbing my sister and going inside for the evening. About a week later, I ventured out to the tent again, only to realize it was gone. I ran inside and asked my mother where the tent was, and she replied that she had thrown it away because it had tears in it. Confused, I tried to convince myself she was lying and just tossed it out because she was anti-smoking and thought the tent looked trashy, but I fear she was telling the truth. Occurrence number 2. One fall morning, about an hour before my alarm for school went off, I was jolted out of my bed by what I can only describe as an otherworldly shriek. It came from the woods. It didn't sound human, but it didn't sound animal either. Foxes and coyotes live in those woods, but they don't make those kinds of sounds. It was insanely loud. Occurrence number 3. One evening, my father and I were up late having one of our classic all-night arguments. As we finally wrapped up our fight, around 3 a.m., my father said he wanted to read a verse from the Bible in order to close on a positive note of peace. As he began to read aloud, that same, or at least very similar, otherworldly shriek boomed through the house. It had to be just outside the kitchen window, but it was so loud that it sounded almost like it was in the house. We immediately ran around the house, trying to find out what the hell had made such a sound, and it even awoke my siblings and mother, who helped in a confused search. After about a half an hour, we all just sort of gave up and went to bed scratching our heads. Occurrence number 4. In my senior year of high school, I got a cat. She was an outside cat, but we would let her into the garage to sleep every night, mostly due to the coyotes and potentially bad weather and whatnot. She would always come home before we shut the garage doors, because she didn't want to be locked out. One night, she didn't show. I didn't think of it much, as sometimes cats go on long, hunting, mating, etc. excursions, only to return in 2 or 3 days like nothing happened. I assumed this was the case. After not seeing her for a week, I went and explored the area behind my house, the fields, and of course the woods. I think I found her. I say I think because I honestly couldn't tell. It looked like her, but she had been seemingly turned inside out. I stared at the remains for about a minute before turning back and going home. I know this is a long read, and if you stuck it out, I thank you for your time and interest. If you can shed any light on what kind of animal or being or whatever, please don't hesitate to share or speculate. My family, especially myself, would love to know what exactly was in those woods. I think there's a Wendigo or something like that near my house. By NaughtyBoy69. So like 4 years ago, a step-cousin of mine and some of his stupid-ass school friends started a wildfire in a small forest. He got beat up by the firefighters. We always thought it was horrible, and we could see the burnt stumps from the highway when we went to pick up my mom at the school she works at. I am sure the forest fire is what made this thing come out of hiding. That year, a wave of suicides burst into the town where her tiny school is located. There are 2 different towns near each other, like 10 minutes. I don't know if it can be related to the thing I saw and heard, but I'm pretty sure if you were being stalked by that creature, not many people would want it to keep going. So now, the actual encounters. It was late at night. I was in my room, the last one on the 2nd floor of my house, watching YouTube videos. Because of the pandemic, the car flow on the highway in front of my house had dropped massively, so it was weirdly silent. Suddenly, I heard crunching on the leaves on the ground. It usually wouldn't scare me because we have cats and those bastards love leaves. But then I suddenly realized the crunches were slow footprints and they were getting closer and closer to my bedroom. And then I smelt the stench. It was like that one time we forgot a piece of meat in our cabinets. I am paralyzed. I have rhinitis, so my sense of smell is stronger than that of the normal human. The stench is making me gag, and then I hear it knock 3 times on my window. 3 fucking knocks made by some hard object. They were soft enough to be as if someone had hit their nail against the huge glass window of a balcony that my dad never finished. It could not have been a stick or a branch because my dad cut most of the branches of the tree next to the window earlier that day. I just laid there silently, trying to take a glimpse of it through the mirror that is in front of the window, but the curtains won't let me. After a few minutes, I could hear the crunches go away, The day after, I went to our laundry room. That's the place with no walls besides the back of my house, and my room is a roof. I could not shake the feeling that something was watching me. Then I heard my mom calling me from the trees from the neighbor's house. I was certain my mom was inside the house, so I picked up the clothes basket and ran inside. Nothing happened after but a few dead cats and dogs from my neighbors. It's been a few months, and I still feel weird reminding myself this, and especially while writing it in stories say that when you say their name and spread their tails, it's like inviting them in. I am scared.